In this lesson, we'll learn how we can start to move and manipulate our objects inside of Maya. So again, for this lesson, we're going to start with a pre-built scene. So let's go to File, Open Scene, and again, inside of our Beginner's Guide to Maya project directory, inside of Scenes, go ahead and open up Lesson 06, Start. So let's go ahead and open this up. Now let's take a look at how we can start to actually move and reposition our objects inside of Maya. Now the simplest way is to rely on our Move, Scale, and Translate tool, or our Move tool inside of Maya. So that's going to be these three buttons right over here. So all we have to do is just simply activate something like the Move tool, and then select our object. Now you'll notice now whenever we have our object selected that we have this manipulator, and we can now start to move our object along the Y-axis, which is this green arrow, the X-axis, which is the red arrow, or the Z-axis, which is this blue arrow. We can also get a good idea of those axis indicators. If we look at this lower corner of our screen, we can see just which colors correspond to which axis. So if we wanted to move this object in any direction, all we have to do is simply grab that manipulator arrow and then move that accordingly. So you can see moving that in one direction. Now if we were to grab this manipulator right in the center, we can actually move this object all around in what is typically called a free transform. Now the Scale and the Rotate tools work in very much the same way. So if we're to select any other object in our scene, and let's switch to something like the Scale tool, which is again going to be this right down in here. Very similar function to what we just looked at previously. So we can scale this object in maybe just the Y-axis if we wanted to flatten this out or really stretch it up. We could do the same for any of our other two axes. So we could squish that up, flatten that out in any direction we want. Or if we wanted to really keep the same object proportions, but just make it larger or smaller, we can grab this manipulator right in the center and scale it up universally in all three axes at the same time. And finally, we have the Rotate tool, which as we grab this, again, very similar function. We can grab one of these different rotation rings and actually rotate our object around any of these three axes. If we were to grab this manipulator right in the center, we can just simply move that freely in any axis we choose. Now, if we were to come in here and move our object around, scale it, reposition it, and maybe at some point in time we determine, well, maybe that's really not where we wanted to move that, or not exactly how I wanted that to be rotated. How can I actually come in and set my object's rotation back to where it was? Well, trying to do this by hand is really going to be almost impossible. So that's where we rely on this channel box area. And you'll notice we have things like the Scale X, Y, and Z, Rotate X, Y, and Z, and Translate X, Y, and Z listed all cleanly for us. So let's say we wanted to zero out the rotations. So we could come in here, select Rotate X, hit 0, and there we are. Now if we want to, we can actually select multiple attributes at the same time, hit 0, and there we are. Now clean zeroed out rotations. We could do the same for our Scale. So if we were to come in here, select all three of these attributes, and set the Scale back to its default value of 1, you can see there we are. Now we can also come in here, and this becomes something really, really useful if maybe we just wanted to set the Translate or the Rotate to something very, very precise. So if we were to take the Translate X, Y, and Z and set all of these back to 0, there we are. Now if I wanted to just very precisely move this up the Y-axis in a very controlled increment, I can come in here and just simply select Translate Y and set that up to something very precise, like a clean value of 1. And now this object is moved exactly 1 unit up in the Y-axis. Also, when it comes to rotation, this is something that is really useful, because if we were to come in here and, let's say, grab our object, just make sure that we are rotating along the right axis. So there we go, something like that. Now if I were to take this and set that to a clean value of exactly a 90-degree rotation, now you can see my object is rotated exactly 90 degrees. Alright, excellent. So now that we know how we can start to come in and move and manipulate geometry inside of Maya, what we'll start to do in our next lesson is learn how we can actually start to move and manipulate the individual components that make up this piece of geometry.